Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon,
أصحاب
Assalamu
المعالي
alaikum, and
والسعادة
welcome to day 3 of the
صباح
World Road
الخير
Congress. And
ومرحبا
it's a
بكم لليوم
pleasure
الثالث
to
من
welcome you
مؤتمر
all with us.
الدولي
It's a
للطرق
pleasure to
بأبو
have you
ظبي.
back with us.
نرحب بكم مرة أخرى ويشرفنا
Today, we
تواجدكم
have
معنا.
two
اليوم
distinguished keynote
لدينا
speakers ready to share
متحدثين
their ideas and
متميزين
insight with
مستعدين
you all.
لمشاركة
Our first keynote session will
خبرتهم
be delivered by
معكم.
Mr. NAZIR
سيقدم
ALLI.
الكلمة الأولى السيد
Mr.
نظير
ALLI was
علي.
founding chief
السيد
executive
نظير
officer
علي
of
هو
South
مؤسس
African
وكالة
National Roads
الطرق
Agency,
الوطنية لجنوب
and he
أفريقيا.
has over 40 years of
لقد
experience as a civil
ولديه
engineer
ما
and in
يقرب من
management
40
in
عامًا
both
من الخبرة
private
في
and public
الهندسة
sectors. He
المدنية
has
في كل من
consulted
القطاعين العام
internationally to a
والخاص،
wide range of
ولقد
governments, including the World
عمل
Bank on
في الكثير من
public-private
المؤسسات
partnerships,
العالمية بما في ذلك
institutional
البنك
reform, and
الدولي
change management.
وذلك كان
So,
بشأن الشراكة
ladies
بين
and
القطاعين العام
gentlemen,
والخاص
please
والإصلاحات
join me
المؤسسية
welcoming
وإدارة
Mr.
التغيير.
Ali to the
سعيد
stage.
رحبوا معي بالسيد علي في على المسرح.
Thank you, MC. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
شكرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة الوزراء والسفراء أصدقائي السيدات والسادة السلام عليكم ومساء الخير.
I have a task over here which I find when I was first asked to do this, a bit challenging in the sense that here I am from South Africa and I've been asked to talk about what's happening in Africa, or what I should say, what is the situation as far as infrastructure is on our continent. I hope that you recognize in the terms, and I'm not sure how many people do, the size of the continent. And, right. If you look at the size of the continent in terms of what we show, that's Africa and the world which we have transposed onto the map of Africa. That gives you an idea of what the size of the continent is. Unfortunately, what we suffer from is people who don't always recognize Africa, and they think that Africa is just one country. We're not. We're 54 different countries stuck in over there, and you can see the two most populous countries in the world, that is India and China, are actually part and fit into that over there, together with the United States, and of course Europe and everything else. So hopefully you've got an appreciation now for the size of the continent that we're talking about. We live in a world today where we're talking about social cohesion and interdependence. As much as we try to become islands in our own rights, we find that it's becoming impossible daily. And unfortunately, there are efforts being made for us to become islands, but we can't. Whether you're a country in Africa or any other part of the world, you are part of the world, and you can see the interdependencies. The central point for us is transport, because it is right to say that the transport is in a boom, is overtaking the world. We talk about transport infrastructure, and we must regard that as a call to action now as never before. And I think we need to change some of the terminology that we use in transport. I do believe that if we talk about the poverty of transport infrastructure, we will probably apply our minds very differently than we do currently, but it's just a thought that I'd like to leave with you. But the question is as to why is it now that there is this huge clamor for us to talk about transport and mobility as a whole. And the reasons are many, but here's one new opportunity for us which has come around together to work together as governments, the private sector, and very importantly, the public. We need to grasp that nettle, no matter how painful it may be to start off with, and to find the appropriate solutions. One size does not fit all. Yes, we can learn from each other, and we should learn from each other, but one size will not fill all. Because we have a younger generation coming in. I can say that now, given the color of my hair, so you'll understand that when I talk about the younger generation. And I do believe that the younger generation have these big dreams, whether it's talking about climate change, or whether it is talking about mobility over there. What is the younger generation crying for? We look at the unemployment rates in our respective countries. Some are worse than the others, especially as far as the youth is concerned. They are crying out for economic prospects, social justice, and the protection of the environment. So we need to ask ourselves in terms of, does Africa have an answer? And I sincerely believe that we do have an answer. Now, these are some of the perceptions of Africa. You'll see the top left-hand side, the hopeless continent. This is the covers of The Economist. The year 2000, the hopeless continent, and then after having read some of the articles in that particular edition of The Economist, we decided to cancel our subscription. Maybe that wasn't a smart thing for us to do. This one can never stop learning and reading. Then we have 2013, the aspiring Africa. We have an aspiration as to where we want to go, what we want to achieve. We have the long neck of the giraffe trying to see something over the horizon and not just within the line of the horizon. 2016, The Economist turns around and says, making Africa work. I'm not sure whether they meant that at the time of 2000 that we were not working. Yes, we were working, perhaps not in a manner that they had wished us to work, but it was appropriate at the time for our continent. And then 2019, which is this year, they're talking about the scramble for Africa. What scramble are we talking about? Is it a scramble for its resources again, as in the past, in the times of the colonies? Because we have an unfortunate legacy. Africa has an unfortunate legacy. At the time of the colonial development, certain trade routes were developed, and all they did was either went from the mines down to the ports and not much more. Whether it were roads that were being built at the time, or whether it was the rail network, nothing had changed. So that was all to do with external flows. The internal routes that were built were not built for economic transformation or for economic progress in that. They were mainly built for security reasons. And there's enough literature to be able to show that. So the access to markets for development of our people in that was restricted. And it's something that we cannot forget as to where we have come from. And what did that lead to? It led to underdevelopment and not any further development. So we need to ask ourselves, the new scramble for Africa, what does it entail now? To some commentators, it seems as if in the past it's the same as in the past, except there are some new role players, and I think we all need to know as to who the new role players are. But let's look at the demographics of Africa. What is Africa doing? What you see over there is the population, the density per kilometer squared, the yearly change, which is rather interesting. In 2019, the yearly change was 1.1%, 0.9, call it 1.1% for the purposes of our discussion. 2019, Africa, the yearly change is nearly 2.5%. The population is growing. If you look at the number of the population, it is estimated, this is done by the United Nations and the World Meter people, that the current population is estimated to be 8.55 of the world. Of Africa's population will be 1.7 billion in there, and that is why you see the yearly change. The yearly change around the world is 0.9%, rounded up figures, whereas in Africa it's 2.3%. And you can see the vast difference. But there is an advantage to that. It's not all doom and gloom around over here. Although it's a conundrum that it is posed for us in terms of what do we do as far as the infrastructure is concerned, we know full well that as the populations grow, there's a much larger demand for infrastructure. And we're talking about basically over here is road-based infrastructure and roads that we are talking about here. But because of the younger population which is coming through in Africa, I do believe that we have what we call a demographic dividend. And that is a positive for Africa, but it will all depend in how we actually use that particular dividend. We need to make sure that our governance is sound and principled. We need to make sure we have capable institutions. Yesterday, we had Dr. Krug here, who also spoke about the capacity. He also showed us in terms of road safety as to what we need to do over there, and I think that still holds, if I may, with his permission, quote him as well. We all know that we have funding challenges. It's not anything new. But there are means and ways, and hopefully as I go through my presentation, it will come through, that we talk about what those new innovative solutions that we have to meet our funding constraints. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that Africa is not doing anything. We have vast numbers of development plans. We have macroeconomic targets, and our macroeconomic targets are not complicated. They're not this thing, anything to do with as if it's rocket science. What do we want to do? We want economic growth. We want to reduce the inequality within our continent and within our own respective countries. We want to promote sustainable use of our natural resources. We as a continent are blessed with vast natural resources. It's a pity, it's a shame sometimes, I think, that we do not actually make use of that particular advantage we have. Now, can we imagine that if we combine what we have in terms of our natural resources together with that demographic dividend as to where our continent will be and the advances they can make. So what did we have? In 1979, we had the Lagos Plan of Action. It was the first attempt to have a Pan-African plan in terms of the development of the continent. Unfortunately, it failed. It failed simply because of the instability that we had within the region and, of course, the global political instabilities at the time and during that as well. Come 2001, South Africa gains its democratic government comes into play. Way back in 1994, the continent is euphoric. This was the last bastion of underdevelopment, deliberate underdevelopment, policies of the government of the time, and where we became a democracy and joined the democratic world around us. That was in 1994. So in 2001, we came up with a plan for a new partnership for Africa's development, NAPAD. That's what we called it. It's a flagship for socio-economic program to achieve social cohesion. It's no different from what we tried to do in 1979, but we have new visions for us to do that. And 2012, to start to give it some flesh on the skeleton that we had built on NAPAD. In 2001, 2012, we came up with a program for infrastructure development in Africa, PIDA, because we recognize that without infrastructure, we are not going to get to where we want to be. This is a difficult journey, and infrastructure is going to be the enabler for us to be able to get to the end of our journey to achieve sustainable development. And one of the ideas of the PIDA is to depoliticize infrastructure development. There's no need to be able, for us to politicize infrastructure development. Everybody uses infrastructure. It doesn't matter what your views are in terms of which side of the political spectrum that you may be or development spectrum that you be. We can't avoid the fact, and we can't deny the fact, I should say, that infrastructure is the enabler. What do we require to make sure? We have a bad reputation as far as transparency is concerned. We have a session tomorrow on transparency. I would appreciate it if people would attend that one as well. As far as procurement and business practice. And this is on both sides. We can't be talking about poor business practices as if it only happens from the public sector. No, it doesn't. It takes two to tango. Unless somebody's going to come and tell me that, there's a new dance out over here that you can tango on your own. As far as I know, the last time I checked, you still require two people to tango. Very important for us to enhance and increase the skills within our member states. And of course, the funding that I've mentioned earlier on. What are the driving forces? Of course, politics are the driving forces. Good leadership, we talk about it every time. It's been mentioned in this particular forum regarding the importance of the last 3 days, the importance of good leadership, political leadership that we're talking about over here, that we need to have respect for the rule of law, respect for our leadership around that we have here. Of course, there's a challenge. Do I spend on social infrastructure or do I spend on economic infrastructure? That's the challenges that governments around have to face, and not only our. But it's a greater challenge for the landlocked countries. If we're going to develop our economies of Africa, we need to be paying attention to the landlocked countries as well. We can't we can't have our landlocked countries live in a sea of poverty, while those around us, those of us who have access to the seaports of the world to enhance our trade and that, and as if that is where we're going to live and not be bothered with our neighbors. Public administration, whichever we want to call it, capable institution, whatever phrase we put onto it, is absolutely important, the institutional reform that we're talking about. Now, not everybody is enamored with the idea of using public-private partnerships, and I think the reason for that is, as governments, we can't make up our minds. You know, when sometimes I believe, not in all cases, but there are cases where there's a trust deficit between the public sector and the private sector. And yeah, I must say, I don't believe that the private sector does enough to be able to reduce or bridge, I should say, that trust deficit that we have. Very important now, of course, technology. Everything has been driven by technology over here. I stand over here, and if there was live streaming taking place, people have been able to join this meeting of ours over here anywhere else in the world. That did not happen in the past. It is technology driven as well. What we're looking to do is deepen regional integration. That is what we're looking to. And if we don't have the infrastructure links, we're not going to be able to deepen that integration at all. How am I going to get from point A to B without any kind of difficulty? Then, of course, the advantage that we have in Africa, and I repeat, and my apologies for repeating it, is the demographic dividend, our human capital. We need to take advantage of that. And it's very important for us that those of us who live are part of the African diaspora, that you guys have a major role, you folks have a major role, both male and female, major role to play in the development of the continent. Please, please remember where you've come from. Those are your roots. Come home. Come and help us build the continent that we want it to be. A little bit about this thing, about the road infrastructure. Yeah, we understand exactly as to what happens with poor infrastructure. I don't need to read the list to you. But one of the points that I want to make over here, it has been shown that poor infrastructure reduces the GDP of Africa by 2%. And that's coming out from the World Economic Forum and other institutions like that. But worst of all, it reduces productivity by 40%. That is the losses that we suffer because of the poor infrastructure. But infrastructure on its own doesn't work. We've got to look at it holistically. And one of the major components, when we look at this holistically, is the land use. Now, we know full well that in our respective countries, we end up with shanty towns. The reason we end up with shanty towns, because we have poor land use planning, one. Secondly, what we have available, those shanty towns develop where the mobility is available for them. So we put additional pressure on that rather than having something more for a holistic approach to the development. It doesn't work on its own. And of course, in all of this, we need to take into account the societal inequalities that we currently have. If we are going to breach those things, our Gini coefficients don't look very good. If I look at my own country, my Gini coefficient doesn't look very good as well. And I can show you very simply, there are not many people that we have to take out of our country from South Africa. And you find our Gini coefficient improves immediately. But what does it tell me? It tells me the huge disparity that exists between the haves and the have-nots. That is what it's telling me, that a small number of people, if I take them out of the equation, my Gini coefficient suddenly looks good. But the development would still be stunted. So we require a transformative force on our continent. Now this is a map. It does look empty, isn't it? Have you guys realized that when you fly over Africa, we don't see many lights burning? It's dark. I'm not surprised they call us the dark continent. But again, there's a huge opportunity as far as energy is concerned for us to move directly into the green energy field. But that's not the topic of our discussion here today. And I sincerely believe that how effectively we manage our road infrastructure is key to the quality of the environment we live in. That public square that we talk about, how do we look after public square? How do we maintain that public square in a manner, in a fashion that we all are proud to use? So that's an important factor as well. But if you look at the missing links, I mean, that picture shows us if all the links are there. But what it doesn't tell you, and I'll show you other slides later on, about the quality of those links. Apart from the missing links over there, we have very few east-west links. Because in the past, the trade mainly took between the north and the south. We have apparently just over 2.7 million kilometers of roads in Africa, but there's a significant portion, probably over 50% of it, which is not paved. And we know full well as the difference between having a gravel road or not having a road at all versus a paved road as far as access to economic opportunities and social cohesion is concerned as well. I'll quickly illustrate this with one small little example. One of the councillors, this is our local authority people in South Africa, we were busy doing some work in one of our provinces, and the guy showed me, because there was a mountain pass along the way, and he has a constituency on the other side of the mountain. It was a 5-hour drive just for him to go and meet his constituency. If we had a road over there, even if it was a simple gravel road in a good quality, it not have taken him 5 hours to go and meet the needs of these people he represented. Just using that as an example to show the importance of the infrastructure. And of course, one of the problems that we have many times in our respective countries is that I've noticed, yes, we build, but we don't maintain. We don't allocate sufficient funds to maintain these things. Because with due respect to people around in our room, is that, it's nice to cut a ribbon. You maintain a road and that, there's no ribbon cutting opportunities, etc. We need to move away from that. We need to make sure that there's sufficient resources being allocated to make sure that we have maintained our roads as well. Yeah? The importance of a road network. 80% of the freight moves on the roads in Africa. 90% of its passengers. Yes, I know that we are looking at the other modes, specifically rail, and it's important for us to do that, yeah? But that is what we currently have, and we have to build and maintain that. And less than 50% of Africa's rural population has access to all-season roads. And of course, the associated safety issues as well. And if less than the 50% of your population have access to a decent road, what are we doing about getting the goods and that to the markets? Just a map showing you in terms of motorization rate, yeah? We have about 42 vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants, which is 77% below the world average. And you can see the different numbers on the map, with my country having sort of the highest number of vehicles on the roads. But if I associate that with the road safety record in that, you'll see how poor that is. Just to show you some of the what we've got, and this comes from the World Economic Forum, the top 10 African countries with quality roads. You can see the index from 2016 to 2017. The blue is the score, which is out of 7. And then there's the world ranking that you've got. Namibia has a small distinct road network, but they do have a good network. You can see that as to what its ranking is versus all the other countries and what the score is. Botswana is small because it has a very, very small road network. It's not that I wanted to put my neighbors, we're not on the map, but that is the information which is available in terms of the road quality index. But infrastructure on its own doesn't develop our economies. It doesn't develop our economies. There's much more that we require in terms of having to develop our economies and that. And one of the indices that we look at is the ease of doing business. Then again, if you look at the ease of doing business and the competitive index, although, for instance, South Africa has a very good road network, we're not doing too well as far as the ease of doing business is concerned, or we're not as competitive as we should be. And therefore, we do understand that roads are an enabler. And it's important for us to consider the other thing. This is fairly common in most of our countries that you see as far as the congestion is concerned. We don't have any paved roads over there. And this I took off from a cover of a magazine called The Quarter Africa. And this is the cover page that was to show what it was around there. And if the economists can show something, I thought we must show some of the magazines from our continent as well. Again, yes, some of the significant resources which are required for rehabilitating and expanding the road network in order to achieve universal access. You can see what is required over there and what the estimates are around. The Rural Access Index is amongst one of the most important indices that we have actually developed these days, together with institutions like the World Bank and that, and they're starting to at least give us some measure of what we require to do. I think this one here I found very interesting when I was putting this paper together, the presentation. The projected infrastructure spending from 2016 and estimated going up to 2030 by regions and the country in trillions of US dollars. The numbers that you see on top of the blue lines are the numbers, are the dollars that the different countries are going to spend, or the different regions over there. Now, from a total of $2 trillion, let me repeat, $2 trillion raised globally for infrastructure projects, only 59 billion went to Africa. We're right at the extreme right hand over there. That is how little that we're spending on our infrastructure compared to the other people. Now, I'm not asking for us suddenly going to this thing spend as much as China or the US is doing, but if we can come somewhere in the middle, it'll be great as a continent. And I'm hoping that the work that we're doing under PIRA and under the NEPED, that is where we will go. What is important in conclusion? I believe that we need to get the basics right. We got to contextualize our policies. We can't just copy from one and think that I'm going to paste it in the other side because it's worked in A, it will work in that, without taking the context into account. I do believe that the two key factors in bridging the gap between poverty and prosperity are education, skills, and of course, mobility. Mobility is the ultimate goal of transport projects. Transport is the fuel, I believe, for the young adults starting off in the world. Economically disadvantaged individuals seeking steady employment, and SMMEs. And we all talk about SMMEs who can absorb the labor, who can create the kind of employment we require, but we need to make it easy in terms of doing business for the SMMEs. I do believe that mobility is the fuel. And finally, furthermore, we need to build good institutions, capable institutions. We need internal capacity in the public sector. We can't believe that as soon as I've sourced that out, that my responsibilities have diminished. They don't. That's where actually they start. We need a capable state over there. And then, of course, the transparent decision-making and procurement. And I want to end off by saying that bad governance cannot be undone by technology. Technology is not going to undo the bad governance. Bad governance has to do with people and as to how we interact with each other. Thank you very much for this opportunity, for having the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. That was an exciting and thoughtful presentation, and we are glad to have you here with us in Abu Dhabi. Ladies and gentlemen, our next keynote session for this afternoon will be delivered by Mr. GUANGZHE CHEN. Mr. Chen is the Global Director for the Transport Practice of the World Bank and is a transport economist by background, having also served as a Senior Director for the Water Practice before the current position, as well as Country Director in Africa in the past. In both water and transport sector, he has advocated and presented international forums on the agenda of mobilizing finance for the sector's needs. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcoming Mr. Chen to the stage.
Thank you, MC. Excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, colleagues, friends, good afternoon. It's really an honor for me to deliver this keynote speech at the World Congress. And I want to thank Pia for the kind invitation. I think NAZIR has done a great job in presenting the challenge of Africa. Having served for 5 years in Africa myself, I can certainly reflect on those challenges, but also opportunities. I think in the World Congress, if I may start the presentation. It's not coming up. Anyway, if may please start this slide. Anyway, I think while we arrange that, obviously, we all know that road and transport infrastructure is central to global development and sustainability. From a development institution, we obviously give a lot of attention to, I think it just jumped, got a lot of attention to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we all know that transport is central to each one of them. But as infrastructure need and quality standard grow, it is increasingly clear that no single entity, being public, private, or multilateral, will be able to fulfill the need, particular financing need of the sector. And this is basically the focus of my presentation, the road to sustainable transport, tackling the finance challenge. This is outline of my presentation. I will start talking about scoping the transport challenge, looking at the finance, and then looking at some solutions, and particularly on the commercial finance side. I think NAZIR even used one of these slides about the challenge in different angles. This is, first of all, road remained the dominant road for moving goods and people throughout the world. But then also in the last decade or so, road freight has increased very fast, particularly in Asia. I mean, you heard about all this new e-commerce, but e-commerce only works if you can move the freights around. And so there's creating a lot of demand, particularly in Asia. But at the same time, in part of the region, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, we still face a daunting challenge on providing accessibilities. In the meantime, as the road transport or freights or railway improvements, you're also facing a more and more challenge in terms of the carbon footprint of the transport sector. I think the little corner there on the right corner, and looking at India's picture, you see the major corridor in India, but that's also where the economic opportunity is, but it's also where the major carbon footprint is. So transport also facing this particular challenge. And scoping this challenge moving forward will continue to expand in the future. There are two major changes here on this slide. One is the fact that I think NAZIR also mentioned about population growth over the next decade or so. We're talking about another 1 billion people in the globe. At the same time, income will increasing. The growth is people are getting richer. There are more and more middle-income people in different parts of the world, particularly in Asia. In fact, estimated there's something like over 1.2 billion people moving to the middle income class. And the demand for transport, both for movement of people and freight, will continue. The other mega trend, obviously, we all know, is about urbanization. And much of that is going to be from the developing Asia and Africa. And all these are creating even more demand in terms of the transport. And the next one is on the, I mentioned already, on the carbon challenge. And we know very well the carbon GHG emission for transport as of today is something like 23%. This is projected to grow something like 70–80% by 2050 in a business as usual scenario. And of course, we know about congestion in urban settings, and we talk about local air pollutions. On the right side, you will see the two charts there. One is looking at sort of the as income growth and how much of that GHG emission happened. And it's pretty much a positive correlation. If you're looking at those dots are basically country data. So what we really want to do is as income move upward, we need to move that curve, bend that curve, so to speak, downward if we want to be able to achieve a much more sustainable environment globally. At the same time, the bottom right of that is about accidents. I think yesterday, WHO Director General already presented that particular challenge. And globally, we are not meeting that particular target. So it's really upon us. And all this really require finance. So how can we finance all these challenges in a sustainable manner? The global infrastructure gap remain large. According to the Global Infrastructure Hub, the estimated annual increase of 2% of GDP is required to meet the infrastructure requirements. And there are many estimates about various trillions, but it's all in the terms of trillions that are needed in the infrastructure sector, in the transport sector. But on the other hand, where the source of financing? Essentially, you're talking about public finance from the budget. You're talking about private finance, different form of PPPs or concessions. You're talking about official development assistance, multilateral, World Bank, regional development banks, EIB, and of course the new players, AIB, etc. But all this, and then of course, there's also a small, limited amount of climate finance available. But total of that, I think you look at the four circles there, it shows you the relative size. This is just an indication, relative size of the availability of the capital in different segments of the capital market, from PPP to corporate finance to sovereign capital market. But the ODA is a very small circle of all this. And this is roughly about $1 trillion vis-a-vis multi-trillion dollars, over $10 trillion in the market. So how do we move that finance moving forward? That's really the topic that we focus. At the same time, many countries is also on the public finance side. Many countries are facing fiscal challenge in terms of supporting infrastructure or road infrastructure development. And over the last decade, as you know, many countries' indebtedness has increased, which obviously limit many of the countries in terms of raising additional finance, the so-called fiscal space. And the lack of that transparency capacity is also making it difficult for traditional agencies, some of the government entities, to raise that kind of finance worldwide. On the upper chart there, you see the sort of credit rating, a range of countries. You will see a lot of developing countries rated below investment grade, which means that if they raise capital in the international market, the yield is going to be very high. But paradoxically, on the lower right corner of that chart, it shows, this is from Bloomberg, is over the last decade, we have increasing amount of capital, what we'll call it frozen capital, meaning they're earning zero to negative yields on those. These are typically, this is the sovereign funds and the sovereign wealth funds, the institutional investors like pension, etc. Of course, most of this capital are in OECD countries. But this amount of money is increasing over the last decade. The last estimate is something like about $17 trillion out there. But this money somehow is not moving to where it's needed, which is the low-income developing countries. Some of this money moved to emerging development economy, but mostly on high middle-income countries. So looking at solutions, first, I think we need to improve the quality of the public spending. Every country, every government obviously have your budget, you allocate resources to invest on much needed infrastructure, but the quality of that infrastructure spending has to be improved. And that requires, there's no magic solution. I think it's a range of from institutional capacity building, legal regulatory framework, project preparation, project execution, procurement, transparency, and contract management. And this works obviously require both a national, regional, and municipal level, and there's a different way of doing it, but I think there's no magic bullet. It's all about hard work and improving public sector spending efficiency. In doing so, you also improve I will come back to in a minute, about the confidence of the investors coming to your country or your sector to invest. Some example of that on the lower bottom is, this is example in Colombia, during the two period in the second half 2014 to the 2015, through competitive bidding, they have two rounds and they increase more bidders. I think it's a repeated game, increasing the transparency and regulatory framework, but also I think there's opportunity for multimodal solutions, which is example of some of those investments under BRI. Another secondary area in terms of solution is really to leverage the funding solutions. What I mean is that to use the public resources available and try to crowd in other sources of fundings. And we saw the demand for channels growing, but many instruments remain unfeasible or not significant source of revenue in the emerging market, particularly in low-income countries. So how do we do that is really the challenge in front of us. So I think I highlighted here, there could be different way of doing it in a range of countries, including ring fencing of revenue. This is obviously about road user charges in the road sector, but these all need to be sustainable increase if we meet the need of the sector. Third is really to explore commercial financing options, because I highlight the fact that public finance will never be sufficient to meet all the needs of the sector. And when we say about commercial financing, it's not just about commercial loans that we're familiar. We're talking about from sovereign finance, we're talking about corporate finance for state-owned enterprises, particularly in the road transport sector. Most of the agencies are still, even your corporatize, are typically state-owned enterprises. How do you use your existing balance sheet or using your asset, using your expected revenue to mobilize that kind of finance? But also project finance, well, I think particularly many of the emerging middle-income countries resort to setting up special purpose vehicles to mobilize finance for their sector. This could be a way as well. But also for private enterprise investment sector, they also need to mobilize resources. But this is all related about credit risk and collateral, what kind of revenue that you expect to receive vis-a-vis the kind of credit risk that the market are able to bear. Let's look at the reality, checking on the commercial finance in the transport sector, which are mostly through a special purpose vehicle and corporatization. These are two charts from the data that we received in 2015 to 2017 from this IJ Global. These are focused on emerging market development economy and shows that something like 2/3 of this so-called commercial finance are coming from this kind of a project finance, special purpose vehicle. Actually, PPP is only a portion of it. It's not everything about PPPs. And there's in the emerging market and development economy, almost all these actually using this special purpose vehicle And state-owned enterprises play a key role in mobilizing those finances. Now, another way to look at the current status of the transport PPP project in the emerging economy in recent years. And this is the data we have, and does not show, in recent years, does not show a very clear trend, except there are fewer deals, but bigger deals. Example of that is Istanbul Airport, for example. That's a big PPP program, attracted commercial finance, or China's high-speed railways. And the other picture of looking at these capital investments that we're seeing in the emerging economy is the viability cap funding is a very prevalent sort of mode of attracting commercial finance. Of course, because the fact that many of the projects at the end of the day is about how much revenue that you can attract through tolls, particularly roads through tolls or other features. Typically, you may not be able to recover 100% of your costs through toll, but you can seek the public sector to provide viability gap financing. Ask the commercial sector to bid for the lowest amount of that kind of subsidy to attract the commercial finance. And that chart on the right shows the type of project that are using this way of financing in recent years. But bringing commercial finance there's no magic bullet. I think NAZIR's presentation talked a lot about corporate financing, about transparency. Here, this is obviously on the right-hand side, is too small to see, but the idea of that is basically this is about moving up the ladder. It's about how you move from a low end to the high end. There are agencies that are able to bring in commercial finance. There cannot bring in commercial finance. And also, across different mode of transport, you will see the ports and airport tend to be able to attract commercial finance, while road sector are more difficult. And in many countries, even if the transport agencies are corporatized, they have to move up the ladder in terms of efficiency to be able to make them commercially viable to attract financings outside the public sector. And this will typically focus on SOE reforms, improving the efficiency of the state-owned enterprises that are managing this particular asset. This is another way of looking at bringing commercial finance to the next level. It's moving to what we call wishes to a virtuous circle, step by step. Here, basically, is the chart showing that on the left side, you have agencies or corporations, state-owned enterprises that are basically loss-making. Of course, nobody will be able to provide commercial finance or willing to do so to them. So the way to move forward is to improve the efficiency, improving their performance, improving revenue recovery, and collecting the bill, so to speak. This applies to other utility, like, for example, water utility as well. And as you move forward, then you may be able to recover first your operating and maintenance costs, and gradually you may be able to recover some of your capital costs from your projected revenue, and then fully towards the end, fully credit-worthy that you can issue bonds or other in an attractive commercial market. And along the way, on the right-hand side, it shows the different kind of financing instrument that can help support agencies moving in that ladder on the financial sustainability. It's starting from the bottom, those that are unable to recover any costs. Of course, it has to be based on public budget finance. At the same time, they have to improve the efficiency, and gradually you can use some of the concessional finance, and also using commercial finance along the way, you can use other de-risk instruments like guarantees, and which the World Bank Group also offer as well. And here in this chart, I want to give you just kind of 3 examples of what we have done at the World Bank, and 3 sort of category countries. One is kind of high middle income country in Mexico, where we basically working with Infrastructure Finance Corporation and see how we can help, this is Fanadine, to help them to utilize their existing road sector asset, to recycle the asset and invest in brownfield area through various forms of financial engineering. And then in the case of middle-income country in India, we're in the discussion with the government, particularly National Highway Authority of India, again, looking at all these many toll roads that are already built in India. How do you use that to mobilize finance into the sector? And then another example is Liberia, in a low-income country where they have a functional road fund, and how could you use the road fund to help convince the commercial market to be able to lend to the sector to support the capital investments in this southern corridor of Liberia, building expressways. And this is, along the way, the World Bank are providing a guarantee and also investments into basically providing a confidence to the investor that are willing to invest in a country like Liberia. So overall, we're saying that this is the type of situation that we're facing. We have tremendous need in the sector, but we also have a lot of frozen capital globally. We're talking about between $15, $17 trillion. But how do you move that money to the front line where the capital is needed? Last week, I think the European Central Bank also announced a further push into negative interest rate. So we would expect that this kind of a capital will actually be increasing, the so-called frozen capital. That capital is sitting on the sideline, but not moving to where it's needed. But what does it mean when a large amount of this global capital is in this situation? The implication is that growth, especially in developing countries, will probably remain slow because the capital stock deteriorate and exhausted. This is really a challenge for all of us working on the finance sector, including the World Bank Group, giving our objective to support the government to move these development ladders. So we're looking for innovations, looking for different means of using existing assets to work for our clients. This is the example that I highlighted there. But a lot that would need to be done, and we are again in the core of this financing, sustainable financing agenda we're all facing. So in conclusion, I have just one slide. Giving all this together, we're talking about demand for transport solution has grown rapidly and will continue to expand in the future because of this mega trend, from urbanization, from population growth, from the need to control carbon emissions, and there's a need to really improve the rural and urban connectivity, which really is underlying the need for sustainable transport and mobility globally. And this will require a sustainable approach. Decision today can lock in investment in countries and cities for many years in the future. That's why sustainable investment and sustainable capital investment is very key. And financing this challenge calls for innovative solutions that combine limited public financing, official development assistance, and with commercial financing. And enhancing the quality of public spending, leveraging sector funding, and exploring commercial finance opportunity will be the key pillars to any sustainable development transport finance strategies. And if these pillars are solid, the strategy will contribute to reduce the investment gap by bringing commercial finance to the next level. And we really cannot lose sight of any of these pillars. We at the World Bank believe that road transport infrastructure and the system has a big role to play. This is not just for promoting growth and economic development, but also enable countries to achieve their social goals. So mobilizing sustainable financing is really essential for us to meet this tremendous challenge in the sector, road, but also transport as well. At the World Bank, as you know, we are proud to host this Sustainable Mobility for All partnership, for which many of you are actually members of that as well. And we'll continue to make our effort and working with you in this challenge moving forward. Thank you for your attention.
you very much, Mr. Chen, for your equally insightful and detailed presentation to our audience this afternoon. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can take away some very useful ideas and practices from our two keynote speakers today. The World Road Congress continues in all of our technical sessions and seminars throughout ADNIC this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you all here tomorrow for more exciting keynote presentation. Thank you.